Welcome to Catholic in America, the show that engages people at the intersection of faith and culture. I'm Father Michael Nixon. I'm joined as always by my co-hosts, Father Doug Martin and Father Tom Dillon.
Today we're looking at sex and dating.
And we'll be looking at some of the relationships between science and dating, sex and dating, and what's going on.
So if you've ever wanted to have a sex talk with three priests, today's your day. Thanks for joining us here on Catholic in America. Today we're talking about sex and dating.
Please be sure to like, subscribe, or share this show.
All right, well, let's talk about the modern outlook on sex and dating.
That's a pretty broad topic.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at psychology today, psychology has lots of different theories on when sex should happen. So like one of the earliest theories of when it's supposed to happen is within 36 hours or after 36 hours. You should wait 36 hours before you should engage.
Of contact with
contact,
person.
yes.
Okay.
That's not like, it's like
just
4, 5, 6 dates. That would be probably one of the earlier theories from some psychological sources. Other psychological sources will say, well, you should wait 6 months. There's a few that say longer. Some say whenever you feel comfortable, when you feel respect and you feel that you know this, when you're willing to entrust your emotional security to this person. So
Yeah, I mean, and also you hear through psychology the compatibility thing. Of how will this person fulfill me? How are we going to be compatible with each other? How are we going to be able to live with each other and experience this in a very in a positive way or in a self-fulfilling way?
I think most people are learning about sex today through the internet, and particularly through pornography. Pornography is kind of most people's first exposure to sex, sometimes at very young ages. And so that's the first image that they have, that's the first understanding, maybe even before they've gone through puberty, is that they had this exposure to this. So recognizing that for a lot of people, that's kind of the standard, or that's the image of when you think of sex, that's the first thing that comes to mind for them as well.
I think that also in the modern world, a lot of people are approaching sex from the perspective of sex being something which I'm using as a tool to get to know this person better. So like, especially before I commit myself to them to a long-term relationship or theoretically to marriage, like I want to explore and make sure that we are, and going back to like compatibility, like sex is a tool for seeing like, are we emotionally compatible? Like is this something, or is this person able to fulfill my needs? And so people are using it in that sense to kind of, it's kind of an exploratory tool.
Mm-hmm. And encouraged too with that, that encouraged to look at, this is how I find myself, that I find myself through these different sexual activities. So if I'm going to be dating someone and I want to know who I am within the context of that, then I need to explore that sexually in order to know more about myself as well.
Well, and then the other aspect of it is just for the pure pleasure of it, that it's not really even related to relationships.
Yeah, it's a function.
Yeah.
So when talking about sex and dating, obviously culture and society has shifted a lot in the past 70 years in the way we approach sex and dating. Maybe we can ask the question, why? What's the reason for these shifts that we're now living in as a culture?
Yeah, I don't think that anyone would challenge the fact that media and especially the internet and technology has drastically changed the human perception and how we address and look at the question of sex in general, and most certainly how sex applies to a relationship. Because obviously the majority of people are learning about sex now, not in the context of family, but a lot of young people, I can't say all of them, but a lot of young people are learning about sex, their first experiences from the internet. And especially pornography has a huge impact because people are being exposed to pornography at such a young age now, just because of the ads and things like that are coming across media and through social media in particular. But just people who are going also, like in the past, like especially like traditionally, like for thousands of years, like you learned about sex in the context of community, because like it was either your parents or it was someone in your family who taught you about it. But now like there's no need for community at this point because of the use of media, especially because, I mean, when you talk about sex in general, I mean, it's a kind of especially an uncomfortable topic, especially for younger people. So when that discomfort comes in, like now we have phones. We can go and that's where most people seem to be learning first about what sex is.
Right, and I mean, let's face it. Today, people are spending less time with each other. Not just kids, not just teenagers or even college kids, but adults as well. We're spending less time with each other because we have other ways to kind of entertain ourselves or to keep ourselves busy or to actually find the facts and the things that we're looking for. It's a lot easier, and like you said, it's a lot less comfortable to be able to go and do a search where no one knows necessarily what I'm searching for. But to be able to ask those kind of embarrassing questions where with an adult, with someone you're talking to, you may ask a question and you may feel like you're a little embarrassed by even asking the follow-up question of that. But it's a lot easier when you have something in your hand to be able to look at it that way and not feel the embarrassment of it and be able to ask the questions that you want to have asked and get answers for those things.
I think, too, just kind of recognizing as a society, the sexual revolution was a response to what can be considered kind of a puritanical movement in society, decency standards in media and other things too. A lot of things that people rebelled against, maybe not talking about sex. So all of a sudden, kind of to go the opposite direction, to rebel against that we're still in sort of the remnants of that, of the sexual revolution, that there's been a huge kind of a rejection of maybe even Christian standards of morality and purity and things like that, seeing hypocrisy and whether from your parents or from national figures or church figures, and deciding to go in a different direction of what we're going to make ourselves. But at the same time, that there are people who are making a lot of money off of this too. Yeah. So it's not some sort of just grassroots, people are just finding their own liberation, that there are people who capitalize on the attraction to sex and they're pushing that, and there's an addictive aspect to it that none of us are immune to, and all of us are impacted by, because we have these images and these products that are being put before us at all times that use sex, and sex is kind of the tool that's most effective.
I think there's also it's important also to recognize, like in the modern world, the standard by what we consider to be our truth standard. So like, how do you determine what is real and what is not? And so like, where does that come from? Because like in the past, for thousands of years, like we had multiple standards to how you would evaluate that. Because like you do it through family, who you saw as your authoritative figure who taught you truth. You could use philosophy. Philosophy was one way in which you could establish a standard of truth. And like now we're such in a scientifically driven world where statistics, numbers, psychology, like what is verifiable and what is like true, but what we've had is kind of the shift, especially in like the last 70 years, is a move to exclusively looking at it through the lens of science and psychology and numbers and statistics, as opposed to looking at it through the lens of philosophy as well as tradition.
Well, I think too, some of it is a lack of historical perspective. Looking back 70 years, if you're a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old or 18-year-old, even feeling the effects of the last 70 years, things have changed so much, where for centuries things were, for the most part, the same, and the shift was a lot slower. Now things seems to be shifting a lot faster because you have the internet, and you have technology and media and stuff. And so there's almost this historical context that if you asked someone at a particular age what they thought about the sexual revolution, they may not even really have a concept of it, just simply because we're so far removed from that perspective that it really doesn't even come into the conscience.
So we're going to shift for this next section here and look a little bit more about the intersection of faith, of intersecting with the culture, these questions that are raised about sex and marriage. So you guys stay tuned, and we'll see you in a bit. Welcome back to Catholic in America. We're discussing today sex and dating.
Please like, share, or subscribe to this video.
And if you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/St. Dominic Media.
All right, so we're now at the third part of our program, and we've been looking at sex and dating, and we're going to talk about how our faith interfaces with this, what our faith has to say about these topics that have been bringing up. A lot of, again, as we said at the beginning, it's a big topic, it touches on a lot of areas of life. So what does our faith teach us about sex and dating, and why does it matter?
Well, I mean, I think faith does play a very vital role in this very topic. I mean, I think it has a lot to say to us and to speak to us. And, you know, first and foremost, that comes to our mind is how did God create us? What did He create us for? Why are we here? What's the purpose of it? And I think all of that plays into how we're really coming to this topic and understanding sex in general.
I do think it's also important, like when we're looking at this question of the relationship between sex and dating, to first ask the question, like what you're kind of talking about, is like, what is sex? And so, because when we look at the question of what is sex and then we answer that question, we don't look and answer that question solely through the lens of science, because science is only able to tell us what happens. Mm-hmm. It's not able to answer the question of ultimately why. And actually, even science has a difficult time of telling us the origin of things. Like even right now, like science can only really tell us like what is occurring, what happens, but like it doesn't give meaning. Like it can't go into the meaning of it. That's why like when we look at the question of what is sex, like we look at it through the lens of one, philosophy, because philosophy can at least theorize on the meaning of things, where things came from as well as where they're going. And then like when we look at this also through the lens of faith, like faith in our Christian faith, our Judeo-Christian faith is able to answer those questions very concretely of like, where did we start from and where are we going? And so like, I think there's also like this in the modern world, especially the modern consciousness, many people are only willing to look and answer this question through the lens of science. But like to really understand like and to give the full breadth of meaning to this act, it's like when I'm doing sacramental prep or when I'm doing marriage preparation for my couples, like I talk with them about like, how do you look at sex? Because like a lot of people look at sex as a function, as a pure function, a function which provides pleasure, which is true and is good. But I was like, but when I asked my couples, I was like, do you look at sex and do you consider sex to be recreational, or do you look at sex and consider it to be vocational?
Good point.
Because a vocation is something which provides us with ultimate meaning, versus a recreation is something which only provides us with temporary meaning. Mm-hmm. So a vocation brings us in lasting meaning where we find meaning and purpose, and we're able to answer like, who am I? Where am I going? But in terms of like temporary pleasure, that's why like, how do we view sex? And that's why I think when you look at, especially the influences of things which try to come in and say, well, this is what sex is, but it always, that's why like John Paul II, when looking at especially like pornography, he said the problem with pornography and the modern view on sexuality in general is not that pornography shows too much, it's that it shows too little.
Yeah. And that it reduces us. It reduces us to body parts, basically.
Correct.
Instead of totality of a person. I think for me, recognizing, you know, I grew up in a family of tremendous faith, and definitely sex wasn't something that was talked about. There wasn't, you know, conversations about this and engagement, and so as a result, unfortunately for myself, I learned all the things that we talked about at the beginning. I learned a lot from those sources, and for me, that became places of pain. That there was always kind of a sense of anxiety or confusion or attack or use. You know, when we talk about lust is bad. Not because, you know, some sort of puritanical reasons. It's bad because I'm making something beautiful and good into an object, whether myself or somebody else. And so as I began to dive deeper into what the church teaches about this, that sex is good, created by God, you know, that He created our bodies are good, all these sorts of things that in a sense society has had to relearn, that it's not some sort of evil thing. But it's so good in that it's directed towards beyond itself. And that's what we talk about sex within marriage, is not just that like all of a sudden there was this really evil thing and then you get marriage and now all of a sudden it's good. It's that it makes sense and is actually only truthful within the context of marriage. So then backing up, I think about like where we've learned about dating and what the church can teach us about that, about how to enter into dating relationships that are life-giving. I learned about dating from Full House, you know, growing up. I mean, like, you know, just you know, as a kid in the late '80s and '90s, like that's kind of what I learned, or Saved by the Bell, or whatever it might be. You know, old school would be Happy Days. Like, oh, that's what it is to be a man. That's what it is to have a relationship with a woman. And so, in a sense, to kind of relearn, to look back on that. So, like, where did I learn about sex? How did I learn about dating? What are my expectations in those areas? And so much of it has to do, and it comes from a place that's, and again, not to condemn, but comes from a place that's hurting and wounded and broken in the people that are writing it, or whether it's a script writer for, you know, for Happy Days or something, or somebody who's producing a movie or a song, that they're speaking out of their own pain. So what does this look like when I bring this to the fact that God made me good, that God created me to, you know, created me as a man, and that it's good that I'm created as a man, that sexual attraction is created by God. Actually, the Catechism says sexual attraction is the Creator's own gift.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of people forget that. They think it's automatically something that's lust, and it's not. Now, it easily goes towards lust, objectifying, using, manipulating.
Which cheapens it, makes it less.
Absolutely. Right. So that to me was kind of I had to keep relearning that over and over again of God's view of sex, and that leads into dating relationships as well, that these don't have to be something where I say, how much can I get out of this, but how can I love this person well and make them a better person? Wouldn't it be great if we had an expectation towards dating relationships where when you do separate, break up, that you're better people?
Yeah.
You know, because of that relationship, not in spite of that
not
relationship.
Traumatized.
Right,
yeah, not traumatized. Which is how,
or something's been taken from you. I mean, that's a lot of times what happens in dating relationships is something's been taken from me, and so I'm not who I was. I don't have that part of me, and sometimes, lots of times, that comes when you introduce sex into the dating relationship. You do lose something there, and that is the point to it.
Well, and I think that it's also like when you look at the difference between why people enter into sexual relations in general, like there are so many people who, and it's not just males, it can be females as well, just on the opposite side, because sometimes I do think that there's some validity to kind of saying, well, it's only men who are interested in sex for physical reasons, women are looking into it for emotional. No, I think that both genders are looking for it, but there can be the individual person who approaches sex in general is like, what am I looking for in this act? Because a lot of people who enter into the act today are looking for physical gratification, pleasure.
Well, and that you say that, I mean, I remember, even when I was growing up, that if a girl called a guy, man, that was really, really forward.
Oh, yeah.
And these days, the girls want what the guys have to a certain extent. The guys have been able to do this and find fulfillment, or so that's what's said. And so girls are more than willing to be more aggressive about this,
so
and
you're
to kind
so
of get their
old
own.
and thinking that someone's going to call another person nowadays.
You're gonna text them.
It is where I'm from.
Or you monitor, like
They'd be texting today.
Yeah, like you meet for 12 hours now, and then now you have sexting, which is going on, which is kind of expected.
Yeah.
At least that's what I see with young people today. Is like there's this expectation of like, you send me nudes, send me different things like that, and that's
See if I'm even interested.
Yeah, see if you're interested. And this is one of the way in which I attract you.
Yeah.
But even when people are looking at like the relationship between sex and dating, like some people are looking and for the gratification. There are those others who are looking at it for emotional security, emotional dependency, emotional connectedness. And so like that's where oftentimes there's a lot of conflict in the dating process. Is like, what am I looking for in this?
I think just looking at this from a faith perspective, obviously we're all priests and we're all sinners as well, but we minister to a lot of people who are married, some people that are divorced, some people that have experienced the heartbreak of adultery within the context of those relationships, people that, teenagers or young adults that are dating. So kind of throughout the whole spectrum, as well as you get to people, we just had a funeral recently that was just amazing, of this couple that has loved each other so well for this couple. I'm thinking it was 55 years of fidelity and love and forgiveness and death of children and all these sorts of things, so that people are all over that spectrum. And so I think, what is the faith response to this? First of all, to me, is that this call to like, you're made for more. And I think that's maybe something that we forget, that this world around us tells us that we're only as good and as pleasurable as we can be to somebody else. We have to be good looking, and we have to be, some sort of sexual master and all these sorts of things, instead of that our own worth and dignity that's inherent to us. But the other thing too is, no matter where you've been, this may be something that we haven't always done the best job of calling out sexual sin, or not having sex before you're married, or being wait till marriage, or true love waits, all these things which have a lot of very good aspects, but for people to feel that because I've done this is now who I am. That virginity is just some sort of like magical status that I lose as soon as I step away from it. But instead to recognize that God is merciful, God wants to forgive. And that to me is so beautiful when I experience people who have maybe started having sex, started being used, abused, or abusing others in the relationships, and experience the love and mercy of Jesus, and experience that, oh man, I'm worth more than this. And other people are too. Just the power of that really it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, and biblically and scripturally, like I go back to the the story of the woman caught in adultery. Is that like in this story, like there's all these men, interestingly, who have cast her down and are, in a very real point, have placed her at their feet and are stepping upon her, or like over and like using her as an object. Jesus in that story is the only person who actually sees her in her identity. He's the only one who's able to actually raise her up, both figuratively as well as literally in that story, where he casts out the ones who are crushing and making her something less than what she is.
And abusing her.
And abusing her, yeah. That she has been turned into a complete object of their machinations. She is being used. And so like in that story, like Jesus, one, he casts them out and they run away in shame, like Adam in the garden, who has to run in shame, right, starting with the oldest. But then he seeing her in her authentic dignity, raises her up, forgives her, restores her dignity, and then says, go and sin no more.
It's such a, that should be the difference. You know, I think when anyone sees a Catholic or a Christian, they should see someone who's always striving towards that. We fall short, but seeing to not just to, you know, all sexual sin is fine and do whatever you want, just kind of a license sort of thing, but saying the incredible, you know, heights that the gospel calls us to live integrity in our sexual identity, in our relationships with others, to live purity and chastity, and also simultaneously seeing people, even those who have fallen into sin, even ourselves when we've fallen into sin, as God sees us, with love and mercy and restoring that dignity. That should be our mission guiding principle at all times.
I think that another thing like that our faith has to add to this is like the very real question is, are you happy?
Yeah.
Like people who are engaging in the hookup culture, people who are engaging in like pornography and sexting and all the things and like what's expected in the modern dating and relationship, like are you satisfied? Like are you actually happy? Is this fulfilling you? Because it like that's what the call of the gospel says, is that the gospel will fulfill you. In the face of these, like are you finding fulfillment in these relationships that are there for one day and then gone the next?
Because we're made for more. I think about that Hugh Hefner, who's famous for starting Playboy magazine and everything. He talks about in an interview. He talks about experiencing this inner emptiness from his own childhood, from a lack of affection growing up in his childhood, and you think of all the objectification of women and stuff that he kind of unleashed upon the world. And he talks about constantly seeking to satisfy something that none of this could satisfy, having these beautiful women that become objects of his pleasure, for his pleasure, and it was never enough. And I think that's maybe kind of an extreme example, but all of us need to recognize that what we're looking for can't be found in turning another person into an object, or turning ourselves into an object, allowing myself to be objectified and used for somebody else, because we're made for real and authentic love, and only real and authentic
committed,
love.
Committed love.
Right. Well, and I think that's what happens. I think that what happens is people are searching for that meaning. They're searching for that love. They're searching for that fulfillment, and they start doing it at an early age because we're hurt at an early age. And so because there's access to something that can heal that wound, or we think will heal the wound, it
kind of numb the ache a little bit.
Numb
maybe.
the ache, yeah, absolutely. That's where we go to it. And so we look for those answers there, like we were talking at the beginning. We look for answers in Google and YouTube because there's experts that are on there that's telling us what to think and how to think about it, because there can be an emptiness and a void to people telling us what authentic love is, how do we experience that, and that sex is a piece of that, but it's not the mega, it's not the height of it, it's not the zenith that we're trying to shoot for, but it's a part of true and authentic love, but in a proper context too.
Also, I think one thing we haven't talked about yet, which I think is really important in this, is the relationship between sex and children. Because like we live in a culture today which says that responsible sexual activity is unprocreative sexual activity. So like what's like that's what most people, if they do have the conversation with their parents, what's responsible, and most certainly is being taught in the public school system, and sometimes even in Catholic schools.
Don't get pregnant.
That's what it is. What is responsible sex? Responsible sex is when you don't get pregnant. But that's called taking away the consequence of the act, because the consequence of sex, which biologically is true, one of the consequences of sex is pregnancy. So if I take away the consequence or the end result, which is pregnancy, then I have taken away the consequence, which the consequence of an act gives you meaning. When you take away the consequences of an act, you make the act meaningless. So it's without meaning, not complete meaning, but you take away the meaning of the act. And like the profound beauty of a child, and that's what in the world today, how many people do we live in a society today where people are terrified of children?
Yeah.
I mean, terrified of having children, terrified like, oh my gosh, there's gonna be all these different problems. And so like the act of taking away the procreative end, and that's what obviously an artificial contraception has done to philosophically the way in which we even look at the question of what is sex. Like sex is not about children, unless it's something which I'm perfectly okay with at this point in my life.
And in control of, too.
And I can complete
And
control.
the joke being, you see someone with multiple kids and they say, you know how that happened, right? I mean, that's one of the common jokes. I mean, you know what's causing that? I mean,
yeah, but as opposed to this being a meaningful act with a beautiful consequence, now we have twisted in our minds that this has become a meaningless act, which is now the responsible way of doing this. But in that, like, there's this emptiness.
Yeah.
There's this, because as opposed to the way that, like, the beauty of what I tell my couples is like, you know that you are ready to have sex with your partner when you love them so much that you want your love to explode into a third person.
Yeah.
Like that, I love you so much that I want our love to become incarnated. I want it to become in flesh, where it explodes with such profundity into existence that a new person comes to be, which is why obviously we're creating the image and likeness of God from our faith perspective. But this is not something which is a terrifying, I mean, it is terrifying, but terrifying in an awe and wonder and like profound way. But like now we look at, and that's where the modern mind, through the lens of without philosophy and without faith, just looks at this as being, okay, well, this can be whatever I want to be, and therefore we don't find meaning in it.
But without that meaning, I mean, without that ultimate meaning, then we put something else in there that means something to us. And so it does become fulfillment, but at a less than what fulfillment really should be. It becomes
Scratches the itch.
That's it. It just scratches the itch, and it leads you towards what you're ultimately going to. But I don't want to get there. But I don't know that I don't want to get there. I don't know what that fulfillment would look like. And so I just know that the thing that I want to make me happy right now, to make me feel like someone loves me right now, is this moment. And ultimately coming to the end of it and realizing, no, that's not exactly what is going to make me feel loved and fulfilled.
So it brings us back to one of our earlier topics as far as dating. Sex within the context of dating. As Catholics, the moral teaching of that is recognizing that sex is proper between a married couple because it's true. They've actually made those vows to one another. It's open to life, all those things. So within the context of dating, maybe just briefly we can go around like what impact can our faith and coming to know the Lord, coming to know the Catholic Church have on people's dating lives to make it better? And the first thing that just comes to me, and that is recognizing that relationships, I think, are so much better when they're in the context of a loving community. When it's not just, obviously there's very good times to be with just you and your beloved, right? And go for that walk and everything. But to have friends and family and support around you. And I think, that our faith is always telling us that even marriage itself is not just for the couple, it's for the sake of the whole community. And so to open themselves up towards that, I think is very freeing and healthy.
I think that what our faith has to provide is meaning, is purpose, a purpose beyond just the moment right here, right now. Because I think that most people, I believe that the human consciousness seeks deeper, lasting meaning. And that's where like the limitation of science and the scientific method in general can't provide that. And that's why we're relying exclusively upon psychology and upon modern science can only provide us with temporary meaning. But like if the human heart desires more, and if the human consciousness desires more, where we want lasting meaning, we want lasting satisfaction, that's where we're going to find that the faith, although it holds us to a higher standard and a higher bar, yes, says wait towards marriage, wait until marriage before you engage in this act, not because it's a dirty act, but because it is something which is awesome. And so like that's, but in that strive for excellence, like we find satisfaction, which doesn't slip through our fingers, isn't gone the following morning, when all of a sudden we're just left once again with loneliness. Like that's where like with our faith, we find that lasting meaning and satisfaction that which the world cannot provide.
So Doug, as a married Catholic priest with kids, like what does this mean for you as far as what you want for your kids and their dating relationships and as they move forward through life?
Yeah, I mean, I really do hope that they can see that living a married life and the meaning that we have in our marriage, that the kind of relationship that my wife and I have with each other, that it's not perfect. It's not always going to be perfect. And sometimes that we find that self-fulfillment, that meaning even in the imperfection of it, but not the imperfection in a sinful way, but the imperfection in that we learn to live with each other and we still love each other all the way through this whole process. And so I often pray at night that my children will find their Amanda, that they will find someone that will love them the way my wife loves me. I want them to find someone that loves them, because my wife is very selfless. She is always thinking of the other. She's always giving. And so her fulfillment and the meaning that she feels in our marriage, lots of times, most of it is towards me, not self-fulfillment, but fulfillment of giving and giving to the other. And I think that's one of the beautiful things you see inside of marriage itself is that marriage isn't for self-satisfaction. Marriage is for the good of the other, which is the way Aquinas defines love, the good of the other. And so in marriage, we're able to look at that and to see that. And I'm hoping my children can get to see that, even when we're not so good to each other. But that they're able to see that this is what a loving relationship is like, that we can work through these things, and that it's not all about sex. I think my kids probably don't even think about that, thank God. But, that it's not all about that. That there's more meaning, it's more meaningful than just that act.
But think about how countercultural that is that sex is about me taking care of your needs, as opposed to sex being what I'm getting out of it. Right. Like at my gratification, what I feel my needs are being met, versus the Catholic perspective on sexuality and on sex is that I am pouring myself out for you, emptying myself out upon you to take care of your needs. And the beauty of that, as opposed to I'm just having to constantly feed and eat and consume.
It brings up too that, because sometimes people will bring up the point as far as like a point of contention. Well, you shouldn't get married to somebody you haven't had sex to because you don't know if you're sexually, you should practice that beforehand. And in a sense that we should, if we're going to practice how to live a good marriage, you should be practicing in self-sacrifice. You should be practicing in virtue and saying no to the things that I want, because that's actually more what marriage is about. It really is. The pleasure will take care of itself. The sexual and sex, if it's coming from a place of authentic, I know that I'm loved by this person, and and we've made these vows to each other. We're committed. We're stable in our relationship. There's going to be there's going to be sexual satisfaction and attraction and all those things, and that will constantly go deeper. But if it's coming from a place where my whole life I've built myself up and our relationship up, not in what can I get out of this, but how can I give, as you said. That to me is such a challenge that the church offers, but it's so beautiful when it's lived. And even when it's not lived, when it's heard and received again and repented and mercy is given, then we can step back into it.
Right. Seeing marriage, not seeing marriage as a ticket to sex. I mean, I think sometimes that's what it was presented as at one point. It was a ticket to sex. Now I can have as much sex as I want to.
Even St. Paul kind of alludes to that in the New Testament. He's like, if you can't be celibate, you can't be like me, then go get married.
Right. But guys come into that thinking, oh yeah, I can do it anytime I want now, so we'll do it all the time.
That's the case, right?
And no, it's not at all. And so you're right. I mean, you think of a married guy as not having to have any inhibitions, just like someone who's not married. I mean, that's the whole thing. You come into it dating and not having any inhibitions, not waiting, not sacrificing, not placing the other before yourself. And then when you get into marriage, you have this big confusion about, well, I thought we were supposed to be able to do it anytime we wanted to. And it's like, well, we can, but this, this isn't, I don't feel like it, or this isn't a good time, or whatever.
You learn the real meaning of responsible.
You do.
And responsibility.
And of sacrifice. And of, again, putting the other's needs before yourself, fulfilling them more so than fulfilling yourself.
And I think it's like, for those who are not looking for sex as just as a tool for gratification, but like people who really are looking at it deeper, like they're looking for the emotional connectedness. I think it's so important that like we recognize that like that is possible, like emotional connectedness is possible outside of the sexual sphere. And like when we create emotional connectedness only and exclusively through the sexual sphere, like there are times which as couples, like married couples, they're not able to have sexual relations, whether because of a biological the problem, you just had a child, again, for any number of reasons. And then like if if our emotional connectedness is tied exclusively to the sexual act, and then all of a sudden that disappears for some reason because of the consequences of life and as things happen, what the danger is that like all of a sudden that emotional connectedness is then gone.
Yeah.
And like I have no way of actually being emotionally connected to this person outside of the sexual act. The sexual act is not available to us. Our emotional relationship's now gone, which I've seen actually happen in couples. And that's like the super danger. It's also why like during the dating period, what I talk to couples about is like, you need to be able to emotionally connect, spiritually connect outside of the sexual act. Right? Because with that, you're gonna have a stronger marriage and stronger relationship, and that it doesn't become one-dimensional because just the natural things of life. Sex is not always available. So like that's the relationship I think that's really important to help couples who are dating to see is like, no, we do need to have emotional intimacy. We do need to be spiritually connected. But we need to do it so that when it's sexual activity is not available, like we have these other support systems in place, as opposed to having just one leg of emotional stability. That one leg is then removed because of an accident or because of a disease or something like that, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Yeah.
And so like having the legs of a table as opposed to being just a single stool, I think
we want people to live the fullness of sexual intimacy and love and joy. And that's through having a good foundation through their dating lives, and if God's calling them to marriage and a life of marriage. Well, guys, we're gonna wrap up at this point, and we've a lot of points that have been addressed. But as we go out, I want to just kind of maybe just go around. We can all just sort of in summary for everything time. What difference does our faith make when we actually decide to live this? If someone is maybe on the fence with this, or they're hearing this for the first time, to start to live the way the gospel's invited us to live when it comes to dating, when it comes to sex, what difference does that make in our lives?
I mean, I think it means that we can make better choices. I think one of the things that it really does mean is we can make better choices about what we're doing, because we're not allowing ourselves to be driven by our passions. We're not allowing ourselves to be driven by just our sheer nature of wanting something and having to have that fulfilled. But by sacrificial love, we're able to actually get more meaning out of it. I think lots of times it's quality over quantity.
I think that our faith provides us the ability to be fully alive, and that means fully sexually alive. The words of John Paul II, the Great, when he says, "Be not afraid," echoing Jesus' words to the apostles after the resurrection. Like the Lord is calling us to the resurrection. He's not calling us to live in a dead state where we're dead into our emotions, dead into our hearts, dead into what we actually desire. And like when we live in this deadened state of just living for gratification and pleasure and just trying to cling and grasp and control for emotional stability and strength, like we live in this half death. That's what the first letter of St. John talks about, is like we're not fully alive. And in sin, we don't find satisfaction, we don't find happiness. We live like the living dead. So actually, I love John's zombie reference. Yeah. But we live like the living dead. And like, but think about it, how many people experience like this half-life, this being not fully alive, like craving something more. And that's what our faith offers us, is to be fully alive and not to be afraid. And not to be afraid to live fully, not to be fully sexually alive, to be fully find ourselves. And that requires discipline and balance, but that's where the faith provides us, is something that the world and just the scientific method exclusively will just say you are an animal. Versus our faith says you are a son or daughter of God.
Amen. I would say for myself, brothers, it's awesome talking with you and diving into this, and for people to have the sex talk with three priests. Just for me, it's always hope and mercy too. That any place where myself or anyone else has experienced brokenness, sexual brokenness, relationships that have fallen apart, and the hurt, the devil's always trying to accuse there, but God's always speaking a word of healing and hope and love. Just really grateful for this time for all of us. And I'm so grateful to you guys for tuning in to this latest episode of Catholic in America. Thank you so much for those who are supporting us. And if you'd like to support us, please check us out on Patreon. Please like, share, and subscribe this video and all future podcasts that we might have. We look forward to seeing you next time on Catholic in America.